Hey, welcome to the Gospel Jazz. We do hope and pray the peace of the Lord is upon you and your family. We're going to be talking about life, leadership, and Jesus with impromptu conversations. And this is a book I'm a little far behind on, but these are our adaptive leaders here. That Canoeing the Mountains by
Todd Bolsinger.
I was going to go with Bolsheviks or something, but whatever. It's better.
I wasn't sure what you were going to say there.
Yeah,
so.
I know. That's why we got to keep this G rated. So, obviously with this last year and a half,
Why do we let him do the introduction?
I don't know. That's you. Somebody else should
A lot
do
of
that
questions.
sometime. Obviously, it's been I think it's been tough, probably for everybody, right? I mean, on a leadership perspective, whether church or business, corporations, whatever. And we feel this is timely. So, I'm going to kind of turn the discussion over to you guys, and as we said, I'll try to come up with some witty anecdotes and timely story times with Uncle Jut.
Oh my gosh.
Try and keep this as short as podcast.
There is nothing in here but coffee, I swear.
So the book actually was written in 2015, so it comes way before
Prophetic.
all of this. Sure. So it is prophetic, but not in the way you mean it. It's written out of the changes happening within our world and the culture of the church that way predate. The last year or 18 months with COVID, the last 4 years. So much has changed within the church during the last 4 years, 5 years, politically. And just the way the posture the church has towards the world, at least in the United States, and the posture that the world takes towards the church, has been shaped by the support and presidency of Donald Trump. This comes before all of that, even. And it's rooted in this belief that the world is changing dramatically. And we've never been here before. Yeah. And if you think historically, throughout the history of the church, there have been these huge shifts that take place. So, in the years right following Jesus, the death of the disciples, within a couple hundred years, there is this formation that takes place. You have the church fathers who begin writing, and there begins to be these councils that take place when we really begin to shape and refine what do we believe as Christians. And out of that come the creeds, like the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed. We discern what is what heresies are, and we begin to identify those things, and what orthodoxy is, and it becomes this incredibly refining process. And we talk about all kinds of finite details about, does the Spirit proceed from the Father or from the Son or both, and what is the nature of Christ? All of this stuff, right? So all of that takes place, and it takes place at a particular time in world history during the Pax Romana, and all that. And then again, world changes, Rome falls, we kind of fall into the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages, and around 1200 AD, there's the Great Schism. Right? The church, the Eastern and Western Church split. You have the Eastern Orthodox churches and the Catholic Church. Yeah. And they split over some language about how the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit kind of work together.
By the way, it's a good thing we don't deal with church splits anymore like that.
Yeah, right? They tend not to divide the entire world these days. But, yeah. They're not new.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
So that happens. And then you have around 1600 AD, the Reformation, which is brewing for a long time, right? But guys like Martin Luther and John Calvin and Ulrich Zwingli and all these, they really become these reformers that just kind of say, we don't have to be part of the Catholic Church. We can kind of create our own tradition and develop our own theologies. And so now you have Protestant and Catholic and Eastern Orthodox and all of that. So that stuff happens. I mean, really, every 500 to 600 years, there's these big splits. The same thing is happening within the world. You've got the fall of Rome, you've got the Dark Ages, you've got the Renaissance, you've got the Enlightenment, then you have imperialism and the industrial era, and you have all of those things transpiring, and they kind of in some ways are in tandem with each other, right? The invention of the printing press, which allowed Bibles to be printed in the common vernacular, and people could have them right now, is part of what leads to the Reformation, because everybody has access to that. Now we're reading it going, well, geez, maybe this isn't what,
Start my own church.
Yeah. So all of that's important.
Yep, absolutely.
What's happened in the last 25, 30 years here in the West is really the beginning of this fall of Christendom. It's rooted in a lot of different things. I think the evangelical movement was birthed out of fear. I think some people maybe saw what was coming, and out of fear, we kind of changed things such to try and circle the wagons and reclaim our essence and whatever, to try and save things. And evangelicalism. It's a failed experiment. I mean, we talked. We've talked about things like, and we're going to continue talking about this fall.
It's the American version of Christianity.
Yeah.
I mean,
It
really,
is.
when you come right down to it. I mean, that's...
It's the Western version of it.
Sure. Let's market it. Let's come up with a
right.
cool logo and a slogan and the T-shirts
And
and mugs. And...
it's falling and it's crumbling.
Yeah.
And the world has seen it for the shell that it is. Like you had talked about kind of in our little introductory episode last week, the veneer, right? The difference between a stone building and a building with stone veneer is the structure.
Yeah.
And the world, I think, has seen this veneer of evangelicalism for what it is.
Yeah.
You have technology and the internet and things. I mean, think about what we're doing right now.
Yep.
Is what major network TV was doing 30 years ago.
Sure.
What we're doing wasn't even really legitimately an option 10 years ago.
No.
Yeah.
Not for the budget that we would have had access to.
There
were some that were doing it, but it was far and away from what it costs now.
I mean, we were recording this. It's a digital camera hooked up to a Mac
PC
computer,
and
right?
A microphone.
Right. 15 years ago, 20 years ago, I remember digital cameras had a floppy diski inserted in the side of them, right?
Right.
You remember back that far?
I'm not as... I remember
He's the young guy.
I remember the world before the internet, believe it or not.
Wow, do you?
Encyclopedias. I just didn't have to use them for very long. We had Ask Jeeves by the time I was in junior high.
Ask Jeeves. Wow, man.
See, I even remember pre-Google. Dogpile. That was. I'm getting.
Okay.
Never mind.
Far afield here now.
So, technology has created, so much, and the rise of social media. Right now, everybody has a platform.
Yep.
And it has changed culture. Back in the 1960 election was a huge defining election in politics because you had the rise of television. So when JFK ran against Richard Nixon and they debated, the first televised debate in history, it was also broadcast on the radio. If you listened to it on the radio, you thought Nixon won because he was so eloquent with his words and speak. If you watched it on TV, you thought JFK won because Nixon was a bumbling mess in front of the camera.
Wow.
And it changed.
Yeah.
I mean, in some ways, historians will say that JFK won the election based on that. Because of television.
Yeah.
What television did in 1960, social media did in 2016. 2012 to a degree, but really 2016.
Yeah. Ramped it up.
And so the world is changing, right?
Yep.
So the point of all of that is to say the world is changing in profound ways. When we say we've never been here before, we've never been here before.
Yeah.
And so that's what's changing within the world. What's changing within the church is Christendom is crumbling. And Christendom is this idea that's persisted for 1,700 years, ever since Constantine kind of made Christianity a state-sanctioned religion in Rome, Christianity has been propped up by culture. It has been given power and privilege within culture. Sometimes just as a way of manipulating the masses. That's what Constantine was doing. But nonetheless, over time, until in the Western world, right? By the time, what brings the Western world in some ways out of the Dark Ages?
Yeah.
It's the work of the church. The Renaissance and some of that stuff was birthed within the church.
Yeah.
Scientific advancements, right? Where scientists, it was all birthed out of the church. Now, the church didn't like some of the things that were discovered, and it got all sideways. But
You mean we're not the
all
center
of
the-
that's changed now. So we're kind of at this point where the world's changed and the church has changed, and Christendom is crumbling. The church no longer has the power and privilege that it had for 1,700 years. It no longer is given the voice that it once was to shape culture. It's not really given a seat at the table. Its ethics and politics aren't really considered, and aren't seen as having value. That's the fall of Christendom. So this book is written out of that place, and it is prophetic, in the sense that when Todd Bolsinger released this book in 2015, Trump was on the horizon, but had no idea what was coming.
Yeah.
And so the book it uses the story of Lewis and Clark and the Corps of Discovery to narrate this never been here before idea.
Yeah.
So the basic concept, if you remember back to the stories about Lewis and Clark and the Corps of Discovery, they were sent out to discover the West.
Yeah.
And it was always believed, because of course we had just, as a nation, we had settled east of the Mississippi, and even if you look at a map of the United States, all of the state lines are all these weird zigzagging lines on these sides, because the borders are all rivers.
Yes. Yep.
The West is very geometric because we just arbitrarily drew the lines.
There's nothing.
And they were kind of drawn around resources, but So if their experience was east of the Mississippi, Appalachia, they had some mountains, and they had
big
rivers and
big hills in the east. There are actual mountains
in the west. But to them, right, that was the mountains that they had.
Yep.
Especially people coming out of whose descendants they had come out of England, which is not known for its mountains.
Yeah.
Right, France.
Yeah.
So anyway, they believed that there was a water route. The Northwest Passage was a water route. There was some way to get by water to the Pacific Ocean. And so they were sent out with the responsibility of the Corps of Discovery. They were expert river rafters, expert canoeists. They designed canoes, they engineered them, they built them, they designed canoes specifically for this journey. Yeah. And they set out on the waterway looking for this Northwest Passage. And they believed that they were going to find it. And they made their way up kind of northwest and towards the Dakotas. And what they discovered in Montana, the water runs out.
Does. Yeah.
And before them were these mountains. And they could, the story goes, they could see them on the horizon, never realizing how big they were.
Truly, yeah.
And so they get out west and discover there is no water route. So they have two options at this moment. They can turn back and say, look, there's no water route. It's a failed experiment. We have to find a different way. There's no water route. What do you want us to do? That was one option. And they maybe were entitled to that option. They were, after all, professional river rafters. That's why they were hired for the job. But there was something deeper within the Corps of Discovery. And that was this kind of manifest, what we eventually would call manifest destiny, this belief that there is something innate within us to discover and to continue to press on, and that it wasn't so much about finding the water route as much as it was finding the route, figuring out how do we do this, and if we're going to conquer the West, how are we going to get there?
They could have had a very small definition of what they were supposed to do. Find the water route. There's no water route. We turn around and go home.
Right.
Their picture was much bigger. Find a route.
Find a route.
There's got to be a route over there. There's got to be a way to get to the other side. That's our mission. It's not just about the water.
And it wasn't just for the sake of the route.
Yeah.
There was something deeper within this core that said it's not about the route. It's about why we're doing this. It's about our dominion.
Well, and let me tell you, we've been traveling to Tennessee the last 4 summers, and not technically in the Smoky Mountains, it's Cherokee National Forest, next one over, but I mean it is. You look at those mountains. We usually come through the Cumberland Gap, and it's just, it's like those people were nuts. Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett, all those guys were nuts to go through there on covered wagons and stuff. And now we just went out west here 6-8 weeks ago. And it, we don't realize, I think, how much here in Michigan our trees really kind of block line of sight.
Right.
It is. You get over the Mississippi, and there's still forests and things, but the further you get west, and then we really notice it at the Missouri River. Like you get over the Missouri River, and like the only place that you will see some trees is along a creek or a riverbed somewhere. And it is. And I'm thinking the same thing. Like these people were crazy.
Yeah.
Because I'm telling you what, I would have turned around.
Yeah.
Right? I would have turned around. So, this is nuts. Just absolutely crazy. So,
I think part of the reason they call that big sky country is because there is nothing to block your sight. Around here, you have to really crane your neck to see, to look up to the stars. Yeah. You get out there, you just look straight, and the sky is right there, and you can see for miles.
Forever. Yeah, forever.
Yeah. It is, and you think about their whole paradigm, right? Their whole world existed there east of the Mississippi River, and the difference, that's just articulating the difference. So they get out there, and this is, some of the genius with Lewis and Clark as leaders, is they say, okay, to their troop, right? They're leading this troop. And imagine how frustrated they are. We get there, the water's gone, so what are we going to do? We're going to press on. Well, that's just not how we do things. I don't know how to scale mountains. Have you seen these things, right? They were expert rivermen who had to become mountaineers. And there are a few things more different than those two, skill sets. And they recognized that the canoes that brought us this far were exactly the tool we needed up to this point, but they're not going to carry us across the mountain. And so the title, Canoeing the Mountains, and the analogy comes from, look, we're experienced rivermen, and we could insist upon carrying these canoes because we're rivermen, doggone it. We engineered them for this trip, and this is who we are, this is what we do. And what you're going to end up doing is trying to ride a canoe down a mountain. Or we can say there's something deeper within us guiding this, and we're willing to adapt to this uncharted territory, to this newness, this never been here beforeness, and figure it out.
Yeah.
And so they do. They sacrifice the canoes, and they repurpose the canoes, right? Imagine what that was for this group of men who had engineered these canoes, built them with their own hands, who used them and get to that point, and they begin to deconstruct them to use them for other tools. I want to say that there's probably some pain in that, and some grief in that.
Fear.
Certainly some fear. And then the other thing that they do is they find someone who this is not new territory for them, and they allow that person the ability to speak into the work that they goes ahead, and that, of course, is Sacagawea. In an interview about the book, Todd Bolsinger, shares that, she was a teenage nursing mother who had no power, no privilege, no authority. She'd been kidnapped as a child in the world that she lived in. But this, for her, this wasn't uncharted territory. This was going home. And so, because to her, this was nothing new.
Yeah.
And they needed somebody who didn't have the power and the authority and the privileges that they had to lead them the rest of the way, because they too now had lost all of that dominion that they had when they were doing the thing that they were skilled, perfected to do. And that's where he gets the term adaptive leadership. It's the ability to be in uncharted territory and adapt to what's happening there. And so, he parallels that story to where we're at in the church today. We've never been here before.
Yeah.
We've never, as leaders in Christ Church, we've never pastored and led in the 21st century before. We've never had social media before, right? We've lived and led through some pretty divided times, but in none of those times did everybody have a platform in their pocket to share their opinion to the entire world.
Yeah.
Quite literally.
Literally.
Yeah.
We've never. I remember when I was in high school reading a book called "The World Is Flat," and it was about how technology had kind of compressed the world. And you think about the fact you could wake up, in Chicago one day and go to bed in Singapore, right? And that was, 20 years ago, back when the only thing was airplanes, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't even about so much about. We had the internet, but it was the book was less about that, or it was about the rise of the internet. Even then, we didn't foresee social media being what it is.
Well, that book, The World is Flat, I've read that book as well, and that book talked about big book. That book talked about how technology was at that moment in time and would continue to radically change the landscape of everything that we were doing, not only in that moment, but for decades to come, and probably for the rest of our lives, probably for the rest of humanity.
Yeah.
Technology is going to continue to advance, and that was one of the eye-opening books. I might have listened to that on CD back when audio books on CD, not just an MP3 file or whatever.
Yeah. And he didn't even understand then, right? What was going to happen. I mean, he just had the foresight to know technology is evolving, but where we would be. What was that book, right? 2004?
Yeah.
Something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
To see where we would be at nearly 20 years later. So as leaders in Christ Church, we've never been here before.
Yeah.
And so we have to be willing to have the difficult conversations as adaptive leaders. What is that core thing inside us that's driving us?
Mm-hmm.
As leaders, Lewis and Clark's job was very similar to ours, right? They were charged with a mission from a higher power. Now that power was the U.S. government, but still, right, from a higher power, right? They're charged with this huge mission for the safety and well-being of everybody entrusted to their care, and to use their expertise to move ahead.
Yeah.
To do those two things, to accomplish the mission and care for the people entrusted to them.
Yep.
And so they had, in some ways, the genius to be able to say, we're gonna dive deep, and we're gonna let that deep inner thing within our core guide us in this. And so for the church, the question becomes, what is that? What's that deep inner core thing? What is the mission, the real mission before us? And until we answer that question, we don't know what the canoes are that were exactly the tool we needed to get us to this point, but won't carry us further. And we also have to know, which these are the ideas we're going to continue to unpack over the next couple of episodes, but it's tremendously difficult work to deconstruct the canoes. Like I said, those men probably grieved that.
Sure.
Yeah.
And there are some people in our churches who would rather sit in a canoe in the middle of the prairie or drag the thing up a friggin' mountain
10,000.
Yeah.
than have to give it up. And there's been people even from our church that said, not so many words, that basically said, I'm going to sit in my canoe
Yep.
I'm done.
I'm not going any further with you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which again, that conversation, the tension there is what was kind of springboard us into our future discussions about being a self-differentiated leader from the systems theory from Friedman, and then Bolsinger's next book, Tempered Resilience, that's kind of a follow-up to this. But it is the tension that exists because being an adaptive leader, leading in uncharted territory, doing this work, is tremendously difficult work. And so we'll kind of discuss some of the how in those books. How do we persevere it? Because sometimes that's just all you can do.
Yeah.
But
well, I'm wondering, and again, I think it's difficult, not in the sense of, I think probably the systems that we need to uncover, right, or the strategies. It's just difficult. I believe, I think in getting people just to do some basic things.
Oh yeah.
Because even staying with that analogy, yes, they had to change their methodology, but who were they at their core? They were explorers. Like I said, it took a certain somebody, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The guys were crazy, but as you said, right, they had a purpose, right, and they were still. It is right. They were still true to themselves as an explorer.
Absolutely.
And some of that also, and I think this is the thing too of, I think by and large, I think the church is fairly untrusting, and so it is some of the. I think when we see a new book come along or a new strategy or something like, I don't know, and you're like, dude, these are the guys that are killing it, right, in this sector or that sector or whatever it is, right, and they have something figured out, right, that we can learn from. And so, I just preached on this this last Sunday. It was 2 Timothy 3, where he kind of tells Timothy, hey, here's all the people that you kind of need to stay away from. But you go and you kind of do a follow-up to that letter in Ephesus. We talked about this before we started recording in Revelation 2, right? Where, Christ praised them, right? You've ferreted out all the false prophets. You've tested all these people that said they were apostles and they weren't. Kind of that thing, like, dude, your canoe is solid, man. That's a fantastic canoe you have. But I still hold this against you. You've lost your first love. And you go, well, crap. You're like, but I have the best canoe. You're like, yeah, you do, right? It's same thing, right? It's gotten us this far, and again, I don't think that's that we throw orthodoxy out, right, or we don't throw our theology out the window or anything of that nature. But learning to be flexible and adaptive, and
part of the conversation in identifying our canoes is for us as leaders in the church is having a conversation about the things we do and what is the real origin of those things. And I would say that what is that deeper thing for us is we are the people of God.
Yeah.
Right? That's that inner core down to our bones thing. Why do you do what you do? Because we're the people of God. And that should mean, to me, that should be that deep-seated why. For Lewis and Clark, it was because we're explorers, right? And we're going to accomplish this mission because we're explorers, even if that means we have to sacrifice and no longer utilize the skills and the tools, right? So for them, being an explorer had required this certain set of assets and tools that made them expert river rafters. But that's not all, right, that explorers can and need to be. And so they said, look, we're not first and foremost river rafters. We're first and foremost explorers with the mission.
Yeah.
For us, that question we are the people of God.
Yeah.
Right. So if that's that deep in our bones thing to say, okay, so what does it mean? What has it meant to be the people of God? What has that looked like? Well, it's looked like a nomadic people in the wilderness who wanted eventually to be like everybody else. So God made them like everybody, right? Track the story of the people of God, right? And it culminates with Christ, and then he institutes his church, and he says, this is what it looks like to be Okay, so what do we do with that? Well, in a particular time, in a particular place, for a particular culture, we became a worshiping body that had influence in all of the community all of the time. And for 1,700 years, that worked pretty well in the Western world. Now it's crumbling, and we have to look. So what did it mean to be? Well, it meant this, but is that all that it can mean, right? Can you be the faithful people of God even if your butt's not in a pew at 11 a.m. on a Sunday morning at the corner of 1st and 2nd Streets?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, sorry, I don't mean... to me, one of the scary things that I see potentially on the horizon, and this is because I'm crazy, but, I think that pendulum has swung so far in the other direction that, it's just inevitable, right? There's always an ebb and flow to things. And I know some of the things that you guys have shared within your denomination of the kind of more fundamentalist movement. And to me, I think there's this like fundamentalist back kick, kind of react, instead of being adaptive, being reactive. Which
is the record, we are not fundamentalists.
Well, I know you're not. Yeah, I'm saying
there's some in our camp.
Yeah. But I think you're seeing that everywhere, right? You're seeing this huge pushback in the culture, and to me, it's a little scary because I think there could be a tendency back towards that, some sort of fundamental
Well, the language
religious...
surrounding that is always, we got to get back to the Bible. That's always the language. We got to get back to the Bible.
Yes.
The assumption is that the change is not biblical.
Right. Yeah.
Because that's the assumption that's made, is that whatever you're talking about, whatever you're wanting to change, you're not doing it the way Jesus would do it. It's not biblical. Stop it. We need to get back to the Bible.
That what they say is when you get back to the Bible. What they mean is we need to get back to our Americanized white evangelical interpretation of the Bible.
Yes.
Right. That's what they mean. Because I would say, get back to the Bible, absolutely, right? I mean, if we're the people of God, what did the people of God do as articulated for us in the Scriptures? Mm-hmm. What did the church do in its earliest days? Let's be the people of the.
But to me, it goes back. That's what echoes Christ's words to the church at Ephesus in Revelation, right? Great, you were people of the book. You nailed it. But you missed the first love, right?
Yep.
You missed what it meant to love
This
people.
was the primary objection that Jesus
God.
has with the Pharisees. That's the objection.
We've done the same thing.
Yeah. Sure.
I mean, to them, the Torah was their God.
Yeah.
To us, the Bible, not to us, to many Christians, especially in the United States.
Evangelical Christians.
There you go. The Bible is the fourth member of the Trinity. Mm-hmm. You can tell a lot. Little things, right? You can tell a lot about a church by the order in which they place their articles of faith.
Oh,
go to church website and read their articles of faith, and the order tells you something. There are many churches, a lot of times fundamentalist evangelical churches, before they say anything about what they believe about the character of God, or Christ, the work of the Holy Spirit, we believe, and it's almost always in the inerrant and Word of God. And what they forget is what John tells us, and that is the printed book, as good as it is not the Word of God. The Word is the Logos. It is Jesus. Yep. This book shares the story.
And it's great.
It's great.
It's wonderful. Yeah. Let's just say that up front. But none of us here hate the Bible.
But it's not the Word, capital W, of God.
Yeah.
It's the Holy Scriptures. It's inspired by God, but it reveals the Word.
And it's some of those things, right? That you go, I think that's part of what needs to be rediscovered. Right. That's part of what needs to really be explored and to be recaptured again.
Well, and
because that's the thing that Paul tells Timothy there in 2 Timothy 3. He says, you have a form of godliness, but you lack its power.
Yeah.
And you go, yep, looks good. Right, but
well, we have grown up and done church in the modern era that says, here's the job you need to do, here's the toolbox to do that job, and we love the tools. Man, every time there's a problem, I just go to the toolbox, I pull out pull out different size hammer, screwdriver, whatever it is to fix that. One of the things that he talks about in this book is that with us being in uncharted territory, we have to be willing to move from an organization that provides religious goods and services. Mm-hmm. Stop being a vendor of those kind of things, and you have to do something different. And he says this right away. This might be in the introduction of the first chapter, that statement that we need to stop being vendors of religious goods and services. The problem with that is now this is part of the uncharted territory. He says the change that is needed isn't about working harder or fine-tuning those skills. Because again, the modern industrial era that we've all grown up in, have benefited from, and all the rest has been wonderful. It's not about fine-tuning or acquiring new skills. It is about a completely different skill set that is required to propel the church into a new way of understanding who they are.
A new method of paddling, right? Yeah. Or simply paddling harder is not going to make the canoe go any better up the mountain.
You're still in rocks, dude.
Right. And so that's been our approach in the church a lot of times is what do we need to do different? And the answers are a lot of times they're problem solving, they're mechanical, they're refining the things we've already done that do offer a religious good and service. We made a commodity out of Jesus.
Yeah.
And so again, that's where the hard work comes in and saying, who are we? Okay, we're the people of God. What does it mean to be the people of God?
Yeah.
And so, again, our expression of church, a body that gathers together 1 to 3 times a week and has potlucks and prayer meeting and Bible study and church board meetings and annual elections and a Sunday school class and a VBS. And, we sing from the hymns and we sing some contemporary songs and we put the worship numbers on the little board out in the foyer and, right? All of those things are not what it means to be the people of God. The people of God have practiced those things faithfully. Yep. Those things have formed and shaped them as the people of God. God has used them, and they were birthed out of a desire to be relevant in a particular time, in a particular place, in the course of human history. And they worked for about 1,700 years. But they are not what it means to be the people of God. They are not what it means to be the church, capital C, which is Christ incarnate. I think sometimes we forget. I use language people of God because it helps remind us of being grafted into the story of God and the story of the people of God and stand upon the shoulders of Israel in ways that I think the evangelical church really does a poor job at. But one of the things that we forget is what it means to be the church. We are Christ incarnate. The church is Jesus in the flesh. Jesus as a person is at the right hand of the Father, but he tells us in the coming of the Spirit, the church, the people of God, the big C, we are Christ in the flesh. Christ is not absent from this world. He is at work in this world, and he is called a people called the church. And that's not defined by what we do on Sunday mornings and Sunday evenings and Wednesday nights or whenever. Those are tools. Those are canoes.
Sure.
Those are mechanisms we used to be faithful, but they're not what faithfulness, the definition of faithfulness.
Well, and I think the obvious thing here, what's obviously been tough for the last year and a half has been separation.
Yeah.
Right, and again, I don't want to get into wherever you
if
sit on
the
all
pandemic
that,
did anything, it revealed our theology about the church.
In as much as we have said, this is a mantra for the last 20 years, it's not about the building, it's about the people. I tell you what, as soon as we were told we couldn't be in our buildings, or we were asked not to be in our buildings, all of a sudden we realized just how much those things are important. Not that they should. We realized. I hear.
You
know what I'm saying?
I do.
We realized how little we believed. It's not about the building.
Or like you said, it did reveal. Yep, the building's important, and we don't count for squat. Right, and that's a shame.
Yeah,
and that's an absolute shame. And so
I think so. I don't want to say too much because I want to leave some content for our next couple episodes. But
is there?
And thinking about
it's been great.
Yeah.
It's been good.
The narrative of Lewis and Clark, and we'll continue to build on that.
Yeah.
The work of adaptive leadership, and then how do we stand in the face of that, which will be a much longer conversation going through kind of a couple books. But it all begins. You can't do adaptive leadership if you don't know what that in your core thing is.
Because if you don't, you're just trying to acquire skills.
Yeah.
To meet the next little thing.
And you're defined by those things, right?
Yes.
Your essence is defined by the next crisis.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the work we have to do is to get outside of that and say, no. Who are we?
Mm-hmm.
Man.
I didn't mean to cut you off.
No. I got nothing else to say.
That's a lot to chew on.
Yeah.
Well, hey, thanks for tuning in, and again, hit that like or subscribe button, and we thank you so much for hanging with us here and talking about Canoeing the Mountains by Mr. Bolsinger. Todd. Reverend Dr. Todd Bolsinger. So, God bless y'all, and have a